Now we welcome Kateryna Semchuk to speak on Ukrainian lesbian history of the 90s and 2000s. She'll speak about her research that includes a story about the ways and places that lesbians met, loved, and lived. It's also a study of the Ukrainian lesbian internet space, a place where the modern Ukrainian community of non-heterosexual women is mostly active. Lesbian activism, the importance of sports and leisure in the lesbian community. After her presentation, Kateryna will join us to answer questions, so please remember to type your questions in the Q&A box.
Thank you, Mia. Thank you, everybody, for inviting me. I'm very glad to be here. My name is Kateryna Semchuk. You can call me Katya. I'm from Ukraine. I'm currently based in Kiev. I'm a journalist, not a historian actually, but also editor, and I do my PhD in philosophy. My interest in her history or lesbian history comes from my personal feeling that it should be done, and I'm also very interested in it. So I did this. I'm doing research for the past 2 years, and I will do a little presentation on what I have found till today. I'm in advance. Sorry for my English. If you know, it will. Yes. Let's. Yeah. So let me begin with maybe some why I started to do this research, actually, because it is understudied in Ukraine. Maybe if there is some studies in gay history, but lesbian history is, there's nothing on this. So not even from 20th century or recent history, there are no books. So younger generation of LGBTQ people are living a little bit separated from their past. They have feeling as if they are new and lonely, and they have to begin from the beginning. But actually, there was a story, that there is a history, even if it's short. But there is still a generation of older lesbians that are here, and I decided that in order to fill this gap, I should interview them and write it down. So, as you know, with all the queer history in the world, I guess it's the same in Britain. The main problems with the lesbian history in Ukraine, and when I say lesbian history, I of course mean also bisexual women, pansexual, and transgender person that were part of the community at the time. But just in order for me to be easy, I will refer to it as a lesbian history. So yes, they are erased from the history. Also, personal stories are not documented because of homophobia and, of course, persecution. There were not as many magazines or books or any kind of signs that were distributed and were part of for lesbians, even for gay people, for gay men. So the small number of documents that is actually preserved, it's a history of persecution, the criminalization, and struggle for the human rights. So if somebody was detained or put in a in a hospital, these are only documents that are left from 20th century. So that's why it's hard to talk about the history. Yes, so I figured that in Britain you have a little understanding of how lesbians or LGBT people live here, or I just wanted to introduce you with a brief history from the 20th century, how they were persecuted, because nowadays, of course, it is decriminalized. We have no criminalization for homosexuality in Ukraine. But it wasn't always like that. As you know, Ukraine was during the up to 20th century, it was divided between two countries, Russian Empire and Austro-Hungarian and Poland. So in one part of Ukraine, in eastern, the criminalization of homosexuality was abolished in 1934 with the Russian Revolution. They just abolished the criminal code. It's not that they specifically abolished this article. And in Poland, punishment for homosexuality existed through the 19th century, also up to 1932. And in January 1934, the Soviet Union returned back the criminalization for homosexuality, but only for, of course, gay men. Lesbians weren't persecuted, but they were put in psychiatric hospitals. Let me see my notes. I'm sorry, just to be. So lesbians had to go through for 3 months hospitalization. Yeah, you see here the notes that I talked about. And of course, with the independence of Ukraine in 1991, Ukraine is the first country on the post-Soviet territories abolished the article for criminal responsibility for a voluntary homosexual act. So my study that I began in 2019, it is based on so far 18 or 19 interviews with lesbians in their 40s and 50s, not only from capital of Ukraine, Kiev, but also smaller cities, Lviv, Kharkiv, Kiev, Odessa, Kherson. And it's hard nowadays to find lesbians older than that who would be willing to speak and open to speak about their past, what happened in, for example, in the 80s and 80s and 70s, past century, because mostly they are they haven't come out still, and because they were not much happened. They stayed married, or yes. So they were particular. They were made to stay in their nuclear families, and in society put pressure on them. So that's why basically for me easier it was to begin the study of the lesbian history from the 90s. So as I told at the beginning, there are not as many documents left. So all my research of the history is based on personal stories, and it's the first time they're written down or even registered on audio, on video. So it's a big deal. And I was what I was putting focus on during my interviews with these women was how they lived, how they met, what they do generally just to to know more about the community, and there was a community. I talked about this previously. So the main characteristics of this period, I think, for me, is that lesbian community has been closely tied with the gay community. It means that lesbians didn't have much of their own places and ways to connect. So they just went along really often with something that gay men were organizing, and there are different. I think it's pretty similar, maybe in some other countries, but in Ukraine it's because, of course, the patriarchy. Then the second reason is lesbians were less economically independent and had less opportunities. So they just used the instruments and what was available and made by gay men. And in this period also is characteristic of LGBT, the rise of LGBT activism. Internet also played a big role here, because with the majority of Ukrainians got access to internet also in the end of the 90s, beginning of the 2000s. And this permitted for lesbians to connect more easily and to create a community, even connect not only on Ukrainian, on the territory of Ukraine, but also between the different countries, Russian-speaking countries. Yeah, so as mentioned, lesbians had lower income and so less. And I think what often is mentioned in those interviews, that people, LGBT people had more freedom than nowadays. I don't know if you know it, but nowadays we have really often attacks from far-right extremists and organizations on LGBTQ members. And then in those days, in the 90s, I'm told that you could walk from the club to the metro station in full drag and nobody would notice. I think maybe because people were less, it was less talked about. People it didn't bother them that. And now there is a large part of, not a large part, but small part of angry people that it really bothers. So I think there is more hate crime nowadays. And the rise of LGBT activism actually started with the fight against AIDS. I will talk about this later. So how did lesbians meet? Of course, letters and from newspapers. It's also something common for also the 80s. It started in the 80s, also for the 90s. It's small advertisements, personal advertisements in newspapers, and then lesbians would write letters through some time, and then they would maybe meet, but not always. And I'm told that it took quite a lot of time just to exchange the letters. And lesbians would use post not for their home, but in the post office, not to be discovered or. Yeah, and in the 90s, there was this Russian newspaper AIDS Info that was really popular among LGBT people, and there was the first rubric "She is looking for her," and that's how lesbians would. I'm sure it's common practice also in other countries. Also, there were pleshkas. It's also something that I think most of queer communities have in different countries. It's places on the town where gays and lesbians would meet. In Ukraine it wasn't specifically, I guess, for sex, but yes, in Kiev there were a few such places that gay men used. Also, of course, parks and the main street called Хрещатик. It's a huge street in the middle of the city, really popular and open. This old Kiev cafe was situated there, so gays would go there, eat ice cream, and then go on these walks back and forth, looking for acquaintances, and lesbians just were joining those places. But not only those, they had their own few that didn't last for long. It's People's Friendship Spark in Kiev. I will concentrate maybe during my presentation on Kiev, because I didn't really have time to cover other cities, and I think it's interesting what was happening in Kiev. This park, People's Friendship Spark, was popular. But of course, lesbians didn't use it as a place for casual sex. They more just met there and then played football later on near that park. But pleshkas were in every major city in Ukraine. Played a great role for lesbians. Firstly, that's how they met, and if lesbians couldn't afford to have a computer and the internet of their own, they would go to these internet cafes. Then they would hang out in groups there. They would go on these chats and forums. Really often. Russian-speaking chats that were used by few countries, Russian-speaking countries, so not only Ukraine. They would talk to lesbians in Russia, make friendships and talk. That's how they spent a lot of their time. But of course, they went for to these forums to meet women, to meet somebody, a partner. For some, it played out well. For some, they just made groups and friendships. There was this popular forum on the Zemfira fan club site. This was Zemfira. She wasn't, but she's still here. She's a Russian singer, really popular in the 90s, and she's like a major. She played a major role in lesbians' lives in the 90s and 2000s. She still haven't come out yet, but I don't. Nevertheless, she's huge, and also it's a different. So her website, fan website, was the platform for lesbians to connect, which I found really interesting, because it was the first kind of platform to get to talk to women similar to you, and you know, a lot of women discovered this huge community through this forums. So and then there was a lot of dating sites and chats that lesbians used. As for bars and clubs, it's actually more sad story, because in Ukraine there was no lesbian bar. There is no today. I know a little about the United States. In Britain, there was a lot of, not a lot of, but there were some lesbian bars exclusively for women. But in Ukraine, no. In the 90s, so I would say that in bars and clubs, in urban spaces for lesbians at the time, didn't play that big of a role in creating community. I think that forums and internet played much bigger role, because that they were met, and then they would come out to bars, gay bars and gay clubs that were already open, but they didn't never established their own place, because there were needs, because these clubs and gay bars weren't totally open for women. They had only Women's Thursdays, so only one day in a week was open exclusively for women. And not everybody liked it, because on Friday you have to go to work. And there were a lot of discussions about why those Thursdays, why shouldn't, like, can we get a Friday? But nevertheless, never came to Fridays. They had always Thursdays. Then they had cyclical themed evenings, so there were groups of and initiatives of few women that would create this themed lesbian parties, and that lasted maybe, it depends, some lasted years, some lasted more, but also there were boat parties over the Dnipro. We have a large river here in Kiev, and private parties. It's another manifestation that lesbians were joining those infrastructure that was created by Iman, and of course they had money to open the bars, and not always those bars like a Stray Dog Cafe or Solar Summers were gay. They were just gay friendly, and then it just turned out that all the people there were gay, and lesbians not always had money to parties, so they weren't good customers for those owners, because they would buy 1 beer, 2 beers for a whole night evening, or but go out to the kiosk and drink, to buy vodka at a local shop, drink and then come back, or they couldn't buy cocktails at these clubs. So that's also the reason, maybe that's why business couldn't survive with only exclusively women as customers. Just some few photos. Stray Dog Cafe, lesbians remember really well. They say that they were treated well there, and they had it was one of the best places for them to hang out. Also, sometimes there was female striptease. So yeah, and one of the themed parties organized in Kiev were drag king parties organized by Elena Shevchenko. It's she's here. It's Elena Shevchenko. She's now a well-known activist in Kiev and head of queer organization Insight. So yeah, as I told you, 90s and 2000 were a big moment for LGBT activism because there was nothing before, and with the independence there was yeah, the people had opportunity and also instruments to organize activism. But in the beginning, money that were given for LGBT activism couldn't be used directly on LGBTQ in Ukraine, but it was given for the AIDS combating initiatives, and some organizations just took a small part of that money and directed it into LGBTQ activism. So without without that money, I think we couldn't start LGBT activism. So and here you have two prominent activists. On the left is Sviatoslav Shermet. He's and Laima Gidar. Laima Gidar is now no longer active, but she was really prominent in 90s and 2000. She established women's organization, first women's organization in Ukraine. She was part of the gay activism in the beginning, and as I'm told, she was organizing a lot. She was really active, and then she decided just to separate because she did a lot for gay men, and then she just decided to go into lesbian activism. So she created this organization named Women's Network. They were educating female activists first time in Ukraine. They had a lot of protest actions that were successful. They had distinct feminist profile, and they created their own website, where also they had a forum, which was and this was another place where lesbians were getting organized around this forum, not only for activist purposes, but they talked there. They were organizing meetings there, just discussing. There was a lot of internalized homophobia, so I'm told that the activists from this organization had to also do educational work with the lesbians who would also be homophobic towards one another. So it was a really great piece of work that they done. One of their most successful initiatives, just some of for you for some of because before I went to that thing, I just remembered I wanted to say that this organization, Women's Network, was not only I think it was successful in that they did really brought a new generation of female activists. So a lot of women who were part of this organization, like Anna Dohopol here, Anna Sherehina, Vera and her sister and Olena Shevchenko, they started doing some active work there, and now they're part of they established their own organizations like Insight, Sfera, Inaya. So yes, so even women's work doesn't exist anymore. Today, there are new organizations were established by women who took part in it in those days. Yeah, so they also published a book, first book on about lesbians, which had a general information, just simple, which was really needed at the time, and were very new, and it was the only book on lesbians you could find. So it was a huge deal, and also this website, which was. It doesn't exist anymore, unfortunately, after the organization stopped existing. One of the most successful projects that Women's Network and Lima Gedar had organized, it's the summer camps in Poltava. It was camps for women where they talked about sexuality, also were taught activism, and they spent some period in the camp. Everybody remembers this camp really well. They say that it opened them, a lot about themselves, about others. They were also, they would invite female moms who were in a relationship with a child who would speak about it, and this was really new for a lot of women, and that the opportunity for them to talk, to be with one another, and just to spend time and then go on and do something that they were inspired about. Everybody remembers it just perfectly, those camps that I think there were 5 maybe of them, and every time it was different. It's something really original and unusual, I think, for Ukrainian. So yeah, and from this camps and women that took part in these camps then went on organizing their own NGOs like Insight, Sfera, and Insha. Insight is a trans, queer, and lesbian organization in Kiev. Sfera is based in Kharkiv. It's also exclusively it's a female and a feminist and queer organization, and Insha the same in the name of the town. Doesn't matter. Yeah, so sport played a big role for the lesbian community in the 90s and 2000. It was one of the ways in which they would spend time. So they had maybe these meetings every Saturday beginning in 2004. There would be small number of people who would play football, and then a much bigger part of audience who would just look and be there, and then they would hang out after that, drinking beer, having picnic. So not only sport did good for those who played it, but also for those who just went there to join. I have 10 minutes, okay. Then this amateur gatherings, football gatherings, turned into more professional, more ambitious thing. Women would do. They created their sports team Energy Club, which is today not exclusively lesbian, but just female. But then in the 90s and 2000s, in 2000, because they were active in 2000, they had a forum also which where lesbians would gather and talk. It was a big part of lesbian community there for not only for football, but yeah, for the life of the community. It's really, I think, interesting and a bit funny. I guess I would be finishing. It's a history in a really short manner. I think what should be still researched is history of lesbians in women's prisons. Because it's also part of the history that's understudied, and everything that I gathered from these interviews, I'm planning to launch an archive. It will be the first archive of lesbian archive in Ukraine. I'm working on it just now, and those stories of those 20 will be written down in articles. Yes, I think it's in short what I wanted to share with you, and I will be glad to answer your questions. I don't know how to come back.
I think there should be a stop sharing at the top of your screen. It's normally
Yes,
red.
Thank you. Yes, there is.
Perfect. So now we'll just have Mia back to ask you some questions.
So far we've got 2 questions in the Q&A box. First question, would you like to say a little bit more about the process of collecting oral history testimony, please? This is such an important way for us to capture queer recent history which is not recorded elsewhere.
Yes. What can I tell about it more? So the process, it's for me the hardest thing I think was to persuade women in importance of sharing their personal history, of explaining them why it is important, not only why it is important how they met their loved ones or friends, or what kind of bars they went to, or how was it, you know, to go to these clubs. I think a lot of them had difficulties in understanding why it is important for somebody outside their lives, and just to make them understand that it's part of something bigger. It's important for others and future generations to know about these things, because it gives us some kind of continuity and belonging and understanding more of ourselves. So it began from I gathered stories from the most active lesbians and bisexual women and in Ukraine, and then slowly I just went from those who I knew, who were active, open to speak, to more closed personally persons. I hope I answered the question.
Thank you. Second question is, are lesbians visible in the mainstream press, television and film in a positive light?
If you mean in Ukrainian TV, in mainstream media, I think TV no. Only recently it started. You know, there are some series who have queer or LGBT characters. With the mass media, it started maybe in 2015 after on the rise of LGBT activism in Ukraine, because after 2014 there were we started having annual prides, and there's this organization Kiev Pride who did a great job of talking about LGBT people with the media. They just took a role of public speakers on themselves. So I would say recently there is, you know, they also did a lot of educational work of the media by going there and speaking and choosing new journalists who would write and talk about them differently. Or there was a rise of articles about more educational, who are LGBT in Ukraine, why homophobia is bad, or simple things like that. So I would say, yeah, it's getting better.
Thank you. We have another question. Are LGBTQ+ people visible in schools?
It's hard for me to say, I think, because I haven't had to do with the still people who are in school, but I think it's much better than for me it was nowadays. If I even if I talk to younger people, they are more open, because you know it's talked much more about LGBT generally in media and in public sphere. So I guess younger people are more brave and open than ever before nowadays. So and it depends maybe on the community. If it's more close community, I think they wouldn't be so visible. They wouldn't be. It might be dangerous for them to be visible. But it's really, I think it's less and less that we have such situations. But I would say that I know quite a few people who are visible, not only in schools, but so in you know, social media, Instagram. It's much more yeah.
Thank you. That was a really interesting talk.
So thank you so much for joining us. We give you a virtual round of applause.
Thank you.
I have to clap very close to my microphone. And you're also getting lots of thanks in the chat. So thank you for such an interesting talk, and good luck with your future research. So thank you so much for taking time to join us this morning, and we thank you very much for your presentation and answering our questions.
All right, I would also like to reiterate thanks before we move on. It's definitely very nerve-wracking to go first at the beginning of a conference. So you did fantastically, and it was a really interesting talk. So thank you very much.